What's up, guys? Welcome to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at Palantir stock, ticker symbol PLTR, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Tuesday, April 9th. Alright guys, Palantir stock here today up 4 cents a share. That's plus 0.17%, essentially a flat day, but we're going to take a look at this name because it's known to be relatively volatile. Pull out as much bias out of today's intraday volatility as we possibly can. We'll take everything the market will give us and try to get a real grasp on this thing heading into tomorrow. So let's start here by doing just a quick volume profile analysis on these wiggles here today on the 5-minute chart. By the way, guys, Palantir is now a daily upload on the channel. It hits every single trading day at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time sharp. So if you have not done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. I greatly appreciate it. Now let's take a look at these moves. Primary moves that I'm interested in here today on Palantir is going to be that dump and honestly very quick and impressive recovery that we got off of the open. And then I want to take a look at this long drawn out intraday fade and then this pop that we got kind of mid-afternoon. So let's take a peek here. Ready? Here. We'll go from left to right as typical. We got a very contextual fade off the open. Listen, guys, this volume profile here, yes, we saw higher volume off the open, but that was nothing compared to on Friday, right? So we take a look here. We get that fade. That's incredibly normal. And like bears, just for context here, what you guys would want to see would be a lot of out of context volume on these two dump candles, and then a huge fade in volume as soon as the recovery hits. Bulls, you guys would want to see, obviously we expect a lot of volume on the open, but you would want to see a quick fade in volume on that second big red candle, and then like meeting or exceeding volume on the two recovery bars. Now, we got that big fade on the second red bar. We got the exceeding on the first recovery bar, and then we got a big fade on the second recovery bar. Listen, for me, guys, that dump and fade is actually kind of a wash, which is not a net positive or a net negative really for either side. It's kind of a net neutral. Now, this long drawn-out fade that we got intraday, now this is a downside move. So bears, you guys want to see some obvious bearish bias? I'm sorry, there's nothing there, right? We're not seeing any periods of 3 or 4 consecutive red bars that are really high out of context, high volume. It's just not there at all. We're seeing consecutive red bars. We have 7 here, but the volume itself is very average. Now, bulls, on the swift recovery that we had, we started to get a little bit of an increase in volume. We have consecutive green bars. You might have an argument there. For me, I'm a little uncomfortable assigning a whole lot of bias there, because if there is, it's very small. I would want these volume bars to be higher. I'm talking 300,000 or 400,000 per bar, and we're just barely out of context of what might be expected in a typical, early to mid-afternoon setting. So all that being said, let's move on here to the 30-minute chart, and we'll take a look at these psychological, self-fulfilling prophecy areas that me, a bunch of traders, and I think you guys need to be paying attention to here tomorrow. Now, if you remember Friday's video, we were talking a lot about how we were getting rejected off of that 200 period, but we had reclaimed the 50 period here on the 30-minute chart in particular. Well, today we now find ourselves above both. Okay, it was essentially a flat day, right? But what happened was these moving averages, the 200 period was in a downtrend. It crossed beneath the stock. The 50 period kind of got dragged up by this early morning volume that was just a little bit higher than Friday's close, and that dragged this 50 period up. It crossed over the 200, which in and of itself, the crossover to me means nothing. It's overhyped, I think. But what that allowed it to do is turn that 50 period into just kind of like a first day psychological support level that held into the close. Now, a few things going on here. We held right on top of that like $23 region. Okay, we closed at 23 on the dot. And now that 50 period is kind of crossing over that level, sitting right there. So listen, bears, a cross back beneath both of those here tomorrow, if not the 200 period as well, is like your best case scenario on the 30-minute in particular. But you guys would want that to happen on as much volume as possible and for as much of the day really as possible. Whereas you bulls, we now find ourselves above all 3 of these levels. The psychological 23 and both of these potential psychological barriers back to the downside, which is the 200 and the 50, right? It's a really good position to be in. We want to maintain that position if we're bulls, which means that if this 50 period remains on an upside trend, this stock needs to drive up out of this hole and get away from 23, which would keep us above that 50 period. Ideally, again, on above average volume would be ideal, at least on the push upside. All right, now let's move on to the 4 hour here and take a look, see if there's anything we can pull out of this. Well, listen, still a flat day, 50 period still trending a little bit to the downside, not at an incredibly aggressive rate, but it is trending downside. We find ourselves in a very similar position. Listen, bulls getting some distance in between 23, which is also the 50 period on the 30 minute. That sets us up for a potential test of the 50 period here on the 4 hour, which you can see in recent history, in recent time, we've struggled to get above. A reclaim of that 50 period on the 4 hour is a really good start for Palantir on the 4 hour, whereas bears, you know, you guys would like to buy some time, really, to let this 50 period continue to come downside and ideally beef up that $23 area as a maybe stronger resistance level. But that implies that the stock can stay flat or fade long enough for that 50 period to get downside and really start to beef up 23, which is likely to take at least a few days. Because remember, the moving averages, even the 50 on the 4 hour chart, they take their time. They're longer, right? So they move slower. Now, the daily is like the big story here. And there's a lot going on in the daily, so let's take a quick look. You guys notice anything or remember anything from last week? The 50-day, which is probably one of, if not the most heavily watched indicators at all on Palantir, because it's the 50 moving average on the daily chart, you know, very heavily watched, tons of eyeballs. It just barely crossed over 23. Heading into the weekend, it was sitting at 23 and it is now just barely crossed over, and we're still sitting just beneath it. Okay, this is a definitive point, at least in the near term, on Palantir. We either do one of two things. We fade beneath 23 and the 50-day moving average, which now beefs up that level to get back upside as a resistance, or we pop above and hold above, creating this 50 as an ascending level of support, which drives us away from 23. Okay, and now we have a beefed up level of support potentially protecting us back to the downside. Okay, so listen, bulls, you guys want to hold above. Now it's the 50-day because we're sitting above 23 with the 50-day. A reclaim of the 50-day is best case scenario. Okay, that and realistically, if you look back here, that very obviously sets up Palantir for a near-term potential test upside of about 25.50, which is that next area of very obvious resistance, along with the psychological area of 25. Okay, whereas bears, a downside hold beneath both 23 and the 50-day moving average sets you guys up for a potential near-term test of that kind of next downside level, which there happens to be now a couple, kind of like that 2240, 2250 region. And then like 2130 is a long-term level that we've had drawn here on the stock. Listen, this is a crucial time for Palantir, especially on the daily, but honestly on a lot of charts. And if we look, the implied volatility on this name is high, you know, compared to the last 2 or so months. It's high. It's just at about the highest point in the last couple of months. So understand that for contracts you own, that you purchased and are holding, you've seen that benefit in the form of IV pump. Doesn't necessarily mean you've made money, of course, but your contracts, you have to think of them as a variety of factors, like all the Greeks coming together and pricing it as one. Okay, if that makes sense. So you can have one factor hurting you or benefiting you, while a bigger factor is hurting you or benefiting you. Okay, so, you know, for example, if we were to see IV continue to fall from here, that would suck a little value out of your contracts in the form of volatility value. That's the Greek vega, which directly comes from IV. Okay, so just understand, if you're a new buyer looking to buy options, that goes for calls or puts, just understand that IV's high in relation to the last couple of months. Okay, so there's a potential higher risk if you're looking in that time frame of IV crush if you're buying while IV's high. All right. Now let's finish up here and take a look at the bias in the chain. We have 170,000 total contracts traded here today, 107,000 calls, and 62,000 puts. In typical Palantir fashion, we are still seeing a call side bias, which has been the case pretty consistently, nearly every single day on Palantir for the last few months at least. Okay, now in the short-term speculator category, that 0 to 20 delta range, we're seeing 35,000 calls and about 25,000 puts, still a call side bias, but not nearly as heavy as that overall call side bias on the overall call put ratio. If you got value out of the video, listen, remember, Palantir is a daily upload, goes out every single trading day at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I greatly appreciate it and it helps out tremendously. And I'll see you in the next one.